Hello and welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast. I'm Blake Brandis.
And I'm Ivy LeClaire.
We're having a conversation today that is based on our episode with Loren Trlin. If you haven't already listened to that episode, we invite you to check out. It's the one before this one. And one of the key things we're doing in this new format of season 2 of the Motivational Millennial Podcast is thematic after shows that are separate from the original interview. And the idea here is that we take a theme inspired by our guest and we share some reflections of our own, have a fun conversation. Anything else you want to add to that, Ivy?
Yeah, I think really what's happening is that we have our own big takeaways from the conversation and things that inspired us from the conversation. And then we bring them together and then we try and come up with a theme that fits both of them.
That sounds like a great plan. We're totally going to do that.
So we'll see how much the overarching theme continues. So what's the theme for this week?
The theme for this week's episode is trial and error. During our conversation, Loren talked about how she coaches young people who are trying to figure out their purpose. And one of the things she does is design thinking, which is helping people go out into the world and figure out what kind of things resonate with them and learn more about themselves through doing rather than just sitting and brainstorming, trying to come up with the perfect purpose just from your own thoughts. It's a lot easier when you have actual real world feedback. And I really relate to this because I feel like my whole life has been a journey of trial and error. When I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do afterwards, and I took the GRE thinking maybe I should go to grad school, and thankfully ended up getting a scholarship to study hip hop in England. But even as I was doing that and working on this PhD, I thought, do I really want to go into academia? I was running a music production and artist management company, and so I had all of these different experiences and trying to just continuously wrestle with that question. What am I supposed to do? Because I'm doing these things, and each of them, there are some things I like, and there's some things that are successful, but is that really what your purpose is about? And I think this is a question that a lot of us struggle with. Have there been times in your life when you've been doing some trial and error to try to figure some things out?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was intentional or like deliberate trial and error. It was more just my approach to things. I appreciate novelty. So in my mind, at least, I changed my career like 30 times, and did like all the research on everything that I needed to become like, first I wanted to be a comedian, and then I was like, no, why don't I be an entertainment lawyer, and then I can represent comedians, and like just all this crazy stuff. But I think when I look at this, design thinking, I guess, what's interesting is that the feedback that I got, no matter what role I had or no matter what job I had throughout my life, people were always coming to me to not always ask advice, but at the very least to have space held for them. Mm. Ever since I was a little kid, no matter what organization I was in, whether it was a student organization or a career, like a grown-up organization, people have just always come to me because I make them feel safe. So it's interesting because the information that I could have gotten could have been focused on like the hard skills. Like, okay, my undergraduate degree is in communications and now my master's degree is in higher ed. And now I have stuff about service background and I need to focus on this, and compiled all of the hard skills that I had. But really the underlying theme and the feedback that I got consistently that I noticed. And again, it wasn't like people were like, hey, thank you so much for being, but just over and over again was that theme. And so it makes so much sense for me to now be in a role of a coach because, I get to do that for a living. And so it makes so much sense that it's part of my purpose.
That makes a lot of sense too, because I think listening is something that's hard to do. And it sounds like for you, people were continuously coming to you in different forms and different ways and asking for this kind of support. And it took, first of all, knowing that that's actually a career that's possible, but also then believing that that was possible for yourself and then trying it. And then you found out that you liked it and now you support people who are looking to make major changes in their lives.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's important about when we think about purpose is that it doesn't have to be directly related, obviously, on the surface to whatever career that you're doing.
Right.
Because my purpose around helping people change what they believe is possible for themselves and for the world could be achieved in a number of industries and in a number of ways.
That's a good point. My purpose for a while was to bring hope and music into people's lives. And you're right, I did that in totally different ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes through actually making music in the music industry, sometimes through motivational speaking, sometimes with the nonprofit work. And so that's a good distinction, that your purpose doesn't have to be either directly related to your career or even anything that is your career.
Yeah, I think your purpose is going to be what's really fulfilling you. And sometimes it's going to involve a medium like singing or painting or marketing or whatever the
Mhm.
medium happens to be. But I think it's really about who you want to be for the world and the impact that you want to have on the world. I think that's the most fulfilling thing. And that is going to come clear to you through that trial and error process.
That's a good reminder as business advice, too, for listening to what you want to bring to the world. And also, like you said in your experience, listening to what people keep asking you for. Because for me, people were asking, hey, Blake, you're into education and hip hop. Our kids love hip hop and hate education. Can you connect the two? And so I just would speak for free for schools for 10 years because that's what people were asking. But I never even thought of it as becoming my career until finally a couple schools had some small budgets. And then it was like, oh, this is even possible as a career. So it's interesting to think about what are the things that you love. And sometimes they might accidentally turn into a career.
So I'm wondering now that you have this quote unquote accidental career that's taken a lot of work and effort. No, I'm just kidding. But,
That's true.
I mean, what do you think is the underlying purpose or the thing that really excites you and is your passion around it, right? Because it's unlikely
Mhm.
that your passion is around like going to a gym and setting up your microphones and you know what I mean? Like making sure that everyone can hear your voice all around. Like what is the thing that really excites you about it?
That's a great question. There's still something about bringing music and hope to people, and in this case, both students and teachers and administrators who are there. But I've actually found that the less I try to define my purpose, the more fulfilled in it I am. And so I'm almost wondering if my purpose has shifted in a way to being fully present and honoring and acknowledging people for who they are and for who they can be and who they want to be. And it's less about needing to bring that hope and bring that music into their lives. I think there's sort of this crusader vibe about that. Like, I have to swoop in and be the hero. And I think it's more now about providing that space, providing that reflection, providing certainly encouragement, but not needing to try to save the day for everyone everywhere.
Hmm. That's really interesting. How do you think that having that shift affects how you approach the work?
I don't put quite as much crazy perfectionistic pressure on myself, although I still put a fair amount because I'm really committed to delivering incredible presentations for the schools because I just appreciate that I have potentially 1,200 students time for 45 minutes, and I want to make sure that that's as impactful as it can be. But I don't think I'm quite as attached to needing to prove that I'm the best at providing that impact. Like, there's a certain amount of ego that I think is allowed to relax when I'm focused more on being present and serving and doing everything in my power to prepare for the presentation. But when I'm actually up there, it's fully about being there with the students versus trying to make sure I'm saying every word right and making sure my order is totally correct. And it usually is for the most part. Not always the first two after we just write a speech, but pretty soon after that. But you've even commented on the difference that you feel when you watch the speeches now versus when I was first doing them professionally.
Yeah, and because you are focusing on being connected, it's okay that it's not in the exact like no one knows it's not in the right order except
Right.
you. So because you're just focused on being present and having fun and being engaged, particularly with grade school kids, because they want to like lay on the floor and like just do
Oh
crazy
my
little kid
gosh.
stuff, it just makes a huge difference. And like that connection is the most important thing. Yeah, that's true.
So, how do you feel like your purpose has evolved to where you are today?
So it's interesting because I don't know if I really thought about my purpose in these terms, except for the last couple of years after doing this work more in depth, the personal development work more in depth. There's multiple philosophies on purpose. And one of the philosophical approaches on purpose that's a little bit different than how we use it is really like the motivation behind why you're getting up in the morning. And so that purpose could be fame, that purpose could be money, that purpose could be finding a partner, like those kinds of external things, all the way up the hierarchy to like your purpose being about altruism and like giving back to the world, which just tend to be how we think about it, right? We're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the highest purpose, which is how we can impact the world in a fulfilling way for us, because that's the way that people find generally the most fulfilling lives, is like focusing on that purpose. I mean, I know this from experience because for the longest time for me, my driver was just about finding stability.
Mm-hmm.
My driver was finding stability in relationships, finding stability in career, finding stability financially and emotionally, and all of these things. So that I wasn't at a place where I was thinking about how do I want to give back, because I was so needing to heal. And so my driver, like, to get me out of bed and to get me to go to college and put myself through college, put myself through grad school and all of that, was just how much I wanted to be able to take care of myself, be independent, not have any kind of addiction or anything like that, and just have my life together. So, I mean, honestly, I think that was the form that my sense of purpose really took for a long time.
And that's a great reminder, too, that for so many people in the world, survival is their primary purpose.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say it's their only purpose, right? It's like obviously they have families and
Right.
there are things that they care about above and beyond survival. But to your point about what is the primary thing that gets you up in the morning and that you're focused on, for a lot of people, it's how am I going to eat? How am I going to provide for my family? Are we going to be safe if they're in a conflict zone?
Yeah. And there was some of that for me, which, coming out of, I experienced a lot of abuse, growing up, and then also in relationships that I had as an adult. So there was a lot of that like survival thing. But then I also think that there was definitely a period, I remember in grad school, like specifically wanting prestige, you know,
Mm.
like I wanted to have a big, huge house with the pool house and like pool boys and pool girls or what, everybody, like, I don't know. And that was what was driving me, like, was prestige. Like I imagined myself eventually being the president of a university one day and like all of these things. And it wasn't until I shifted to doing this work. I mean, I moved out here, started working with you, but I think I just was doing a lot of internal work and growing so much and like feeling so much safer and feeling so much more stable, that need to be not just not poor, but like satiated, like with money, became less important because I felt safer and I felt like I could release like that grasping to that purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great distinction also because I think so often we define ourselves by what we feel we don't have. So like fame because we don't have it, money because we don't have it, safety because we don't have it. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, often those are things that are missing in our lives. But you're right, it can be difficult sometimes to focus on things that aren't just the core things we feel we're lacking. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. That's as I'm saying that, it feels like that's sort of a privileged viewpoint in a way. Does that make any sense?
Well, I mean, I think probably yes and no. Because just because that was my driver and I had that particular childhood and background doesn't mean that people with similar childhood and background their driver wouldn't be like, there are kids who like start nonprofit organizations or something when they're like 9.
Mhm.
That just wasn't where I was at. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think that's just my particular case. And so I think we can't like blanket know
Sure.
that because a person's in a certain place of privilege financially or otherwise or whatever, that they're going to automatically now just like be focused on a higher calling of purpose. And if they're not, then they're only going to be focused on survival. I think it just kind of depends on the person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's true, because you can still have millions of dollars and feel that you don't have enough.
Right.
Or you can still be incredibly attractive from some objective or from some outside perspective, but never feel like you're enough.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's a good place to shift to something you had mentioned wanted to talk about, which was worthiness.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because I would say that in a lot of ways, achieving prestige and achieving wealth, I guess, in my mind, was about proving myself worthy. And it's so interesting because this is one thing that the conversation with Loren reminded me of, which was about success and money and how it's related to worthiness. This is a hilariously beautiful tie-in because you kind of got the progression of my relationship with money and worthiness. And now it's shifted in a new way. And so this is the kind of the trial and error too, right? Of my relationship with money and how that is related to worthiness. One of the things that lately I realized around building the business, Motivational Millennial, and putting more of my own brand out there and doing more workshops and things like that, is that subconsciously I didn't feel like I was worthy of success, and that like success was for somebody else. Even though I've been working on the business for 3 years with success in mind, you know, there was still struggle, and there were still ways in which, and are still ways in which I'm holding myself back out of fear and all of these things. But I had a realization a few months ago that was about, really, when I was thinking of success and picturing successful people and wealthy people, I was putting them in like a category that was like not me. It was like not for me. I've always seen those people as not my peers. And so subconsciously, there was like a lack of worthiness around reaching success, because a part of me felt like, this is not for you. This is like not who you are. And it wasn't even conscious for the longest time. But I think a lot of people who are self-employed and are getting their own clients or doing their own art or whatever form that they're doing, worthiness is a big issue when it comes to how you value yourself and how you value your services, and basically around money, meaning how much you like charge for the value that you're bringing into other people's lives. Because if you don't feel that sense of worth, if you don't feel that sense of value, then you're going to undervalue yourself, sell your services and products for significantly less than their worth, really. And that's going to impede your success in the long run. And so your sense of self-worth is directly related to your success in that particular instance.
And if you are trying to offer your services and a certain group of people is not valuing them, aka they're not buying whatever you're selling, I think there are a couple of things to look at. One is that maybe those aren't the right people. So maybe there's a different market who will value your services accordingly. Or maybe there's something about what you're offering that isn't resonating, or that people don't necessarily see the value. And that could just be as simple as changing some ways you talk about what you're doing. It might not be that you need to change the actual thing you're offering or making, but maybe the way you talk about it needs to change. And I say that because I think we can personalize the struggle so much. And I definitely have been guilty of that, being like, oh, what if I'm just not good enough? And really all it took was changing the wording on an email campaign for the business to go through the roof. I mean, that is mind-blowing to me. How much time I spent in self-doubt and questioning whether I was truly helping students, whether I was giving enough value, and just instead of saying, do you want a hip-hop motivational assembly with the doctor of hip-hop? We just said, Would you like a growth mindset assembly that focuses on grit and helping students be resilient? And just changing it from making it about me to making it about the impact that, in this case, the assembly was going to have on the audience, it totally changed the response. And I think that's just a good reminder that it's easy to default go to self-doubt, to your point about worthiness, and I'm not good enough as the immediate answer to why something's not working or working as well as we want it to be.
And I think, too, to make this applicable to anyone who's listening and not just people who are self-employed or running their own business, just looking at your relationship with money and how you view money. I think oftentimes in our culture, it's like money is both fetishized. Oh gosh, we said that word too many times. And demonized, right? So we have a huge love-hate relationship with money. We're not taught how to have a healthy relationship with money. And so it has a lot to do seemingly with our value. So I think looking at that is important because, like, for example, if you've been working at a company for a certain number of years and you feel like you have put in a ton of work and that you've brought a lot of value, and it's time for you to get a raise to reflect that value. Or if you're a woman, like really knowing that oftentimes when you go into a new job or a new industry or whatever, like actually go and first of all compare what your experience level and job listing, like compare what other organizations are paying for that. Because as women, and particularly women of color, even more so, are going to be given a lot less of a salary offer. So knowing your worth as a woman when you're going in as it relates to money, to getting a new job or trying to get a raise or something is really important too. So I think there's just an element of looking at our sense of worthiness, our sense of value. There's a great book called The Soul of Money. I cannot remember the name of the author at this particular moment, but we can put it in the show notes. It's about your relationship with money. So what are your thoughts about having a relationship with money?
I think I've always come at it from a real place of guilt, which I think can happen. And for me, it was about there's so many people who have less money than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't deserve to have this money. Therefore, I should give it to other people all the time. And that has led to a number of very self-sacrificial situations where I have provided a ton of work and a ton of support and not necessarily been reciprocated with either money or gratitude sometimes.
Shoot.
Yeah. And so I am now shifting into a place of really recognizing my value, my worth, and my power. I'm not powerless. I don't have to give it away. And just because I generate money and choose what to do with it doesn't make me a bad person. I can still make an impact through charitable giving or whatever, but also through the work I'm doing, through the work we're doing, through hiring people, through any number of different ways that doesn't involve me being poor. And I think that's definitely a shift for me, because if I had stayed on the trajectory I was on, I think I would have been in this eternal cycle of building up money, giving it away, building up money, giving it away, building up money, giving it away. And there's nothing wrong with that, but just for me, it was coming from an unhealthy place. To your point about a healthy relationship with money,
it's coming from guilt rather than from like wholesome generosity.
Wholesome in the Buddhist sense, yes.
Wholesome in the Buddhist sense,
right?
Wholesome is, and it's not causing you or anybody else additional suffering.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, because I mean, some people, that's fantastic. Millionaires and billionaires who generate a ton of wealth, give it away, generate more wealth, give it away. That's freaking awesome. That's definitely a cycle I would love to reach at some point, but from an empowered place.
Yes.
And not from a sacrificial place.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable in that, because again, I think we have this weird perverse relationship with money where we either don't have it, we want it, and we resent people who do have it, or we do have it and we feel guilty about having it, or we work really hard to have it and then we feel guilty about having it, or we feel like we're better than everyone because we have it. Like there's no, at least culturally, normalized, healthy relationship where it's viewed as, at least in my perspective, energy or spiritual energy, wherein it's an exchange of value, and it also helps us to give to others. It helps us to give to ourselves. And like it's a fine line, but I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's really validating, probably for a lot of people who are listening.
Well, I hope so, and I appreciate that acknowledgement because I think it's hard to talk about money. It's hard for me to talk about money. I know it's hard
so
for a lot
weirdly
of people.
taboo, and it's because we have this weird relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate this conversation today. I think we stayed fairly on the trial and error theme.
Yeah.
You're pretty good.
Yeah, and variations thereof.
Life is basically just trial and error. We could fit anything into this theme.
That's right. So just do the best you can with what you got.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, okay.
That was sort of a lumberjack wisdom nugget there for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And stay tuned next week. We'll have another interview with someone. We're excited about that. It'll be a surprise. Do 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 doodly do. Was
that our end theme music?
No, that was the surprise. It's a surprise. Dun dun dun. Doodly do.
Every surprise needs a doodly do.
That's a good bumper sticker.
Doodly do. Doodly do. Doodly do.
That's reminding me of the Addams Family a little bit.
Oh yeah?
The Addams Family.
All right, no copyright violations. Thanks, everyone. We love you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will catch you next week on the Motivational Millennial Podcast.
For show notes and previous episodes, or to learn more about our coaching and event offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
Our theme music was composed and performed by our very own Blake Brandis.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Brittany Felix. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!